Against Cincinnati, with the game slipping away, SHEDEUR Sanders orchestrated a drive that may have altered the Browns' offseason. It wasn't flashy, but it was clutch, threading throws under pressure, commanding the moment, showing exactly why Andrew Berry went to the mic this week and emphasized Sanders' importance. That final possession told the front office what they needed to know. Even in chaos, Sanders stays composed. That's not teachable. That's rare. Which is why Berry's recent comments weren't about damage control, they were about direction. In the face of media criticism and disappointing stats, the Browns aren't hedging, they're investing. They're crafting a system around Sanders not in spite of the noise but because they've seen through it. The QBR debate? Dismissed. The off-field distractions? Handled. What's left is a clear mandate. Build around the quarterback who just proved in one critical drive that he's not.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
Andrew Berry didn't dance around the question. He stood at the podium, stared down a skeptical room and made it clear. SHEDEUR Sanders is the quarterback this team is investing in. He acknowledged the growing pains, the uneven stat lines and the relentless questions about QBR, but none of that changed his stance. Berry wants Sanders to take a major step forward before week 1, and that's not just hopeful language. That's a benchmark, a statement of belief. There was no sugarcoating the past few games, especially with how raw Sanders looked at times. But Berry emphasized context. The lack of protection from the offensive line. The limited first-team reps. The messy rotation in preseason. He wasn't making excuses, he was providing clarity. And the way he framed it made it clear that internal evaluations matter more to the Browns than the outside noise. SHEDEUR Sanders hasn't been silent about the pressure. He's felt it. The cameras. The media discourse. The skepticism. But what's different is how he carries it. Sanders has kept the focus on learning the system and working with the staff to adjust to the pace of the NFL. Berry echoed that development, pointing to the quarterback room's conversations, the weekly film sessions, and how Sanders has responded to coaching. Berry didn't mince words. The goal is for SHEDEUR to be ready by the start of the next season. Not just active ready, as in fully integrated, poised to start and trusted to run the offense. And from the way he spoke, it didn't sound like a maybe. It sounded like a when. SS in Browns vs. Bengals match. If there's one moment from SHEDEUR that's still sparking debate, it's that final drive against Cincinnati. The Browns were trailing, the offensive line had been collapsing all game, and Sanders had been hit more times than anyone would like to count. But with the clock working against him, he rallied. He marched down the field, strung together quick passes, and capped it off with a clutch throw into tight coverage. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't effortless. But it was decisive. That drive was a statement, not that Sanders had arrived but that he was capable. That when the game demanded poise, That drive now sits in a growing list of moments where Sanders has shown flashes of exactly why the Browns believed in him. Across multiple games there's been a pattern. Struggles early, moments of brilliance late. It's not ideal, but it's also not rare for a rookie quarterback in a chaotic system. Berry's confidence stems from those flashes. He sees the makings of a quarterback who can grow into the role, given time and support. Not every play has to be perfect. But if the right ones show up at the right time, you can build around that. That's the thinking inside the Browns facility. When SHEDEUR addressed the media after that Bengals game, he didn't take the bait. There were questions about the QBR, about whether he was ready, about whether the criticism had gotten to him. But Sanders just talked about execution. What worked, what didn't, and how the game slowed down when he trusted his reads. He acknowledged the hit he took on second down during that final drive, but brushed it off as part of the job. There was no excuse-making, no frustration. Just a calm demeanor and a focus on growth. That's what Berry sees. That's why he's not rattled by low numbers in a few columns. Berry's stance on QBR was subtle but pointed. He didn't launch into a tirade against analytics, he uses them religiously. But he made it clear that context is everything. A stat like QBR doesn't factor in missed blocks, wrong routes, or third-string receivers. It doesn't tell the full story. What it does show is part of the puzzle. But Berry is looking at how Sanders manages the pocket, how he adjusts pre-snap, and whether his decision-making is trending upward. That's the lens through which the Browns are evaluating him. And by that standard, Sanders isn't flailing, he's progressing. Sanders himself has mentioned how much of the transition comes down to timing. NFL defenses move faster, schemes are more complex, and mistakes get punished immediately. But he's embraced that. He studied tape obsessively, worked with the staff on footwork, and focused on internal growth, not outside validation. He's not asking for anyone's approval. He knows the stakes. He knows the headlines. But he also knows the playbook, and Barry's public support makes it clear that the team believes in that knowledge turning into. The Bengals game didn't just show SHEDEUR's toughness, it highlighted how much faith the team already puts in him. That final drive wasn't a throwaway series. The coaching staff gave him real responsibility, real control. And he didn't shrink. He stood in the pocket, delivered clean throws, and kept the tempo up. It wasn't a win on the scoreboard, but it was a win in the film room. And within the organization, those are the kinds of moments that stick. The kinds that separate a placeholder QB from a franchise. Across other matchups, the numbers haven't always backed up the eye test. The QBR has dipped into uncomfortable territory more than once. But again, context matters. Sanders has played behind a struggling offensive line with minimal chemistry due to rotation, and often in catch-up situations. That's not an environment where stats will flatter anyone. But if you isolate key plays, decision-making under duress, and growth from week to week, it's hard to argue he's not trending upward. Barry clearly sees that. And for now, that internal confidence outweighs any external skepticism. SHEDEUR also addressed a topic that had been lingering off the field, the burglary incident. He confirmed that arrests were made, the situation had been handled, and that his focus was back on football. It was a quick acknowledgement, but one that showed how he's compartmentalizing off-field chaos. No theatrics. No self-pity. Just a player trying to stay locked in on development. And that's what stood out to the coaching staff. That amid all of it, pressure, scrutiny, personal violation, he's still showing up, improving and pushing to earn his spot. Back at the mic, Barry's tone didn't shift. His patience is strategic, not passive. He made it clear the Browns aren't chasing a quick fix. They're playing the long game, and SHEDEUR is central to that timeline. He acknowledged that the team has seen growing pains before. Young quarterbacks in development always bring turbulence, but that this case is different. According to Barry, Sanders isn't just learning the playbook. He's absorbing the culture. He's been showing up to optional meetings, building chemistry with veterans, and keeping his circle tight. That kind of investment? It's not something you manufacture. It's something that signals long-term buy-in, and Barry knows what that means for the locker room. When Sanders talks about leadership, it's less about hype and more about accountability. He's spoken openly about wanting to earn the trust of his teammates through actions, not press conference quotes. That shows up on the sideline too. Multiple players have noted how Sanders checks in with linemen, reviews plays mid-series, and stays engaged even when he's not on the field. That attitude is exactly what Barry praised. He framed Sanders' communication and professionalism as early signs of quarterback maturity. Not just the X's and O's, but the intangible qualities that win over a locker room. The Browns aren't hoping Sanders becomes a leader someday. They're already treating him like one. That final drive in the Bengals game wasn't just a highlight. It's already being dissected inside the Browns facility like a teaching tool. Coaches have been using it to showcase how Sanders processes defensive shifts, how he anticipates throws under pressure, and how he keeps composure with the clock ticking. Sure, the stats won't jump off the page. But the decisions he made? They're the kind of moves veteran quarterbacks get praised for. Sliding protection. Trusting timing. Delivering on 3rd and long. That drive may have only taken a few minutes on the field, but for the Browns, it represented months of progress crammed into one sequence. Even beyond the Bengals game, there's been a steady narrative building from insiders. SHEDEUR is learning faster than expected. Coaches have pointed out that mistakes made in Week 2 were cleaned up by Week 4. Concepts that were once shaky in practice are now executed with confidence. And even though the reps haven't always been consistent, the improvement has. That kind of trajectory is what keeps the front office anchored in belief. Because in the NFL, development doesn't always show up in highlight reels. Sometimes, it shows up in less hesitation on a check down. Or recognizing a disguised blitz one beat earlier. And if you stack enough of those moments, you end up with a starter. When Sanders last met with reporters, he wasn't defensive about criticism. He acknowledged that his QBR wasn't where he wanted it to be. But he also reminded everyone that no single number defines his game. He talked about staying focused on situational football, 3rd down conversions, red zone execution, and ball security. That's where he's putting his energy. He didn't shy away from the mental aspect either. The pressure, the spotlight, the learning curve, it's all part of the gig. but instead of venting or brushing it off, he pointed back to preparation. According to Sanders, the best way to quiet the noise is to play through it. Barry echoed that mentality when asked about how Sanders is handling the scrutiny. He said quarterbacks in this league either grow from criticism or shrink under it. And from everything he's seen, SHEDEUR is growing. The staff hasn't seen a drop in confidence or energy. No panic. No regression in response to adversity. He even brought up how rare it is to find young quarterbacks who actually want to be coached hard. Sanders welcomes it. He sits down with offensive assistants and digs through film. He questions why certain reads weren't there. That kind of curiosity, Barry said, is what separates projects from prospects. There's also the off-field side of things. Sanders has been intentional about staying out of drama and distractions. He spent the bulk of his time focused on team workouts and keeping communication open with coaches. Barry mentioned that leadership off the field matters just as much as what happens between the lines. And it's not performative. Sanders hasn't posted his workouts all over social media. He's not filming a docuseries about his grind. He's just doing the work. And when you're trying to build a locker room around a player, that quiet consistency is worth more than one big media moment. Even his demeanor during the Bengals matchup felt different. After getting sacked on back-to-back plays, he didn't fold. He didn't wave off the play caller. He regrouped, called out protections, and moved forward. That's not something every rookie does. And when the team needed poise the most, he delivered it. Not with hero ball antics, but with execution. He didn't take unnecessary risks. He made the smart throw. He moved the chains. Those small decisions are what win games down the line. That's what the Browns are betting on. The bigger picture here is that the Browns aren't panicking. They know what they have. And Barry's comments serve as a very public reminder that outside noise doesn't dictate inside strategy. The staff sees the improvement. They see the attitude. And most importantly, they see the trajectory. QBR might trend on social media, but it doesn't tell the full story. And inside the building, the story is this: SHEDEUR Sanders is on track. It's not about perfection right now, it's about proving he's coachable, resilient, and hungry. So far he's checking those boxes. That's why, when Sanders addressed the burglary incident, he didn't dwell. He thanked law enforcement, confirmed the arrests, and moved on. The incident had shaken him initially, but he made it clear that football remains the priority. That composure didn't go unnoticed. Players rallied around him after that moment. Not because of what was said, but because of how it was handled. And Barry brought that up as well, how players watch each other's reactions to stress. In a league full of distractions, how you respond matters just as much as how you play. Barry circled back to one thing that keeps coming up when the Browns talk about Sanders: development over distraction. It's not about flashy storylines or overhyping one great drive. It's about repeatable habits. Barry praised SHEDEUR for consistently showing up early, staying late, and asking the kind of questions that young quarterbacks usually shy away from. He made it clear that, while the team isn't rushing anything, they're preparing as if Sanders will be the guy. That means more reps in off-season workouts, more responsibility in film breakdowns, and possibly more voice in how the offense evolves. You don't do that with someone you're unsure about. Sanders has said multiple times that his confidence isn't based on stats, it's based on preparation. And when asked about the expectations from Barry, he didn't flinch. He called it fair. He said if the front office expects him to take a leap, then he expects to take a leap. He doesn't want a redshirt year or a soft learning curve. He pointed out how many rookie quarterbacks get caught up in proving people wrong instead of proving themselves right. For him, it's about controlling what he can: his study, his timing, and his responses under pressure. The rest, as he put it, is just noise. That's what made the Bengals' drive so revealing. The pressure wasn't just on the scoreboard, it was in the narrative. Sanders had been criticized for looking too raw in earlier games. Social media was swarming with takes about his QBR, his pocket presence, even his decision-making under blitz. But when the lights were brightest, he didn't force anything. No overthrows. No panic scrambles. Just reads, timing, and execution. The end result wasn't just a scoring drive, it was a moment that silenced a lot of the noise, at least inside the... Since that game, Browns staffers have been using tape from Sanders' recent drives to recalibrate how they evaluate quarterback growth. Instead of hammering completion percentage, they're focusing more on time to throw, release mechanics, and mental processing speed. Barry and the staff aren't ignoring the traditional stats, but they're not obsessed with them either. The context of each play matters more. Who was on the field? What was the protection like? Did the receiver run the right route? These details are what keep the Browns optimistic about SHEDEUR's upside. When asked if he feels pressure from being labeled the franchise QB, Sanders gave a short answer: "Pressure is a privilege." He credited the veterans on the team for keeping him grounded, and specifically mentioned how having open communication with the coaching staff helps eliminate guesswork. Reporters tried to press him on critics, but he shrugged it off. "That's what they're supposed to do," he said. "Talk. I'm supposed to play." It wasn't arrogance. It was focus. A tone that continues to build trust within the Browns organization. Barry also addressed the elephant in the room: outside perception. He acknowledged that the media has been overly aggressive in some of their critiques. But instead of going on the defensive, he leaned into transparency. He admitted that the team knew development would take time. They didn't draft SHEDEUR expecting instant perfection. They brought him in because of his long-term potential: football IQ, leadership, resilience. Barry stressed that the path to becoming a franchise quarterback isn't linear. It's about small, consistent gains. And right now, SHEDEUR has backed that up with the way he talks about progress. He rarely brings up the big plays when he's reflecting on a game. He talks more about missed opportunities, near picks that weren't punished, or moments where his mechanics slipped. That kind of self-awareness is what's keeping him grounded. He's even spoken about rewatching tape multiple times per week, not just his own but league-wide film. Studying how other quarterbacks react to similar pressures, learning how to adapt quicker. It's not glamorous, but it's the kind of work that builds. There was one play during the Bengals' drive that didn't get much airtime but caught the attention of the coaching staff. A disguised safety blitz came late. Most rookies take a sack or force a bad throw. Sanders adjusted protection, recognized the threat, and checked into a quick slant that moved the chains. That sequence was mentioned by Barry as a highlight. Not because it changed the score, but because it showed real-time processing under stress. That's the kind of intangible that's hard to coach. And when it shows up organically, especially in a rookie, you don't ignore it. Across his short NFL sample size, Sanders has shown steady gains in tempo management. Early on, he struggled with the play clock. You could see him rushing calls, getting penalties, or burning timeouts. Now, he's smoother, more in control. Barry credited that shift to how quickly SHEDEUR absorbs feedback. He called it a rare coachability trait that's already earning respect from position coaches. It's another reason why the Browns are giving him more autonomy week by week. He's earning it, not demanding it. At the most recent press availability, Sanders responded to a question about fans' expectations with something that stood out. "They're allowed to expect greatness. That's what we signed up for. No deflection. No platitudes. Just ownership." That quote was shared by Browns players on social media, and Barry referenced it later as an example of maturity beyond his years. And maybe that's the through line here: through the QBR debates, the offensive line issues, the media spin, Sanders keeps showing maturity. The Browns aren't just seeing it. They're banking on it. Andrew Barry closed out his media availability with something that sounded more like a directive than a suggestion. "We're not worried about outside narratives," he said. "We're building something with SHEDEUR and we like where it's going. That's not just PR polish. That's a front office doubling down." Barry's never been one to stir hype for the sake of headlines. When he speaks that plainly, it's because the work behind the scenes backs it up. And in this case, that work involves designing the Browns' offense around a quarterback they believe will be ready to lead it. Sanders has carried that same energy. Not loud. Not performative. Just locked in. He's acknowledged that the work isn't done, and probably never will be. He said multiple times that progress means owning every detail, every mistake, and every success. You get the sense he's not trying to arrive at greatness. He's trying to earn it daily. And the more you hear from him, the clearer it becomes. Sanders is done trying to win people over with words. His focus is on the next practice, the next adjustment, the next read. That's what the Browns want in a leader. Not someone waiting for the narrative to shift, but someone forcing it to. That Bengals drive keeps coming up for a reason. Not because it was perfect, but because it was earned. Sanders didn't get bailed out by broken coverage. He didn't survive on checkdowns. He pushed through chaos, stared down pressure, and trusted his mechanics. That kind of execution, under that kind of scrutiny, speaks louder than any press release. The throw on 3rd and long to move into field goal range? That was the moment. Sanders stood in, took a shot, and delivered a strike. That play is already being used in the quarterback room as a breakdown of toughness, timing, and control. And across all the games, all the film, that pattern is consistent. Sanders doesn't panic. He adjusts. He builds. He learns. Whether it's handling a shifting pocket or recognizing disguised coverage, he's getting quicker. Not just in his feet but in his brain. That's why Barry and the Browns aren't interested in dumping him into a numbers debate. QBR can't measure leadership. It can't calculate the weight of a collapsing pocket or a sideline full of vets watching to see how you respond. The tape tells the truth. And the tape shows a quarterback coming into form. At his last presser, when asked what his biggest focus was going into the offseason, SHEDEUR didn't hesitate. Command. Not stats. Not headlines. Command. That word says everything about where his head's at, and where the Browns' trust is coming from. Because at the end of the day, this isn't about hype or hope. It's about trust. Barry trusts the process. Sanders trusts the system. And slowly but surely, the Browns' future is taking shape around that trust. If you're seeing what we're seeing, and you're ready for the ride, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed. Because if this is what SHEDEUR Sanders looks like at the start, you're gonna want front row seats for what comes next.